ambition doesn't require sacrifice if I'm doing it right. It requires sacrifice in terms of like sleep and my personal time and things like that.
Sure.
But I think this idea that I don't have to compromise who I want to be in the world to achieve the goals I want to achieve. And that's a huge thing to unlock.
Yeah. My name is Bethany Saltman, and I am an author and a best-selling book coach.
And I'm Fran Hauser. I'm an author, a keynote speaker, and a publishing strategist. These How I Did It conversations will inspire listeners to claim their own authority mindset and turn the story they can't stop telling into a book the world needs to read.
This is Bookbound, the podcast, created in partnership with Share Your Genius.
Hi there, and welcome to the show, everyone. I'm so excited to introduce you to our guest, Julie Chavez. She's an elementary school librarian, so many books pass through her hands every day. And now she has her own book out in the world, a memoir titled Everyone But Mysel. Her bookbound path is super interesting. She was pursuing a hybrid publisher and then switched to Zibby Books, a boutique publishing house. This continues to be a theme we're seeing with authors, the pivot around publishers, agents, or their general plans when it comes to creating a book. And Julie really gives us the juicy details of what it's like to navigate these choices. But I'll let the conversation do the rest of the talking. Let's dive into our chat with Julie. We're so excited to be joined by Julie Chavez, who is publishing her first book, a memoir titled Everyone But Mysel. I'm going to show it. Such a good book. I loved it. I loved it. The book is actually coming out January 2nd, 2024. So it will be out by the time this episode airs.
Perfect.
Which is really cool. And we're so happy to have you on, Julie. Welcome.
Thank you both for having me.
I loved your book. I read it in a weekend. It was incredible. I really enjoyed it. And I'm so excited that now I get to talk to you about the process. And so let's dive in. The question we really like to start with is, when did you know that this story was a book?
I love that question because I think there are so many ways that people get to the process of writing a book, and it's so different for everyone. And I love exploring how that happens for people. So that's a great question. I think this one was sort of particular. So in 2012, I started a blog like, everyone and their cousin. And I really enjoyed writing. I didn't have a background in writing. I was actually a Spanish major in college. So I wrote in Spanish, but I never took any creative writing classes or anything like that. But I started writing about our family, and it was actually inspired by my husband's pen pals. Yeah, he had a middle school pen pal named Keely Flynn, and she was a writer, and she had this blog, and it was so funny. And it had all of these really pointed, funny observations, and she would write, and I would think, oh my gosh, how does she know that that's exactly how that is, right? Like how Tupperware will never dry fully if you don't actually dry it. And I remember that being one where I thought, oh my gosh, that's amazing. And she just was such a fun writer, and she wrote about her kids. And so I basically copied that. And because I've been a lifelong reader, and I always thought, oh my gosh, I would love to write a book. It was a dream. So I write this blog for a number of years, and, people were very kind and encouraging during that time. And they said, Julie, you're a good writer. You should write a book. And I remember saying so many times, I don't know what it would be about. I don't know the story. And a lot of that is twofold. I think the first is that I wanted to make sure it would be something valuable, because I was also looking at the end products of all these books and thinking that's what I would have to write. But now I understand that happens in about 1 million drafts. So I think I was looking at an end product, which stopped me from ever starting. But then also, and I didn't really know the mechanics of story and things like that, but I did know that in terms of what I was writing, I just needed it to have a little more bite to it and feel like, okay, there's something here. So I go back to work in 2018. Everything really falls apart for me personally. And at the end of that time, I was talking to my principal, and she had said the year prior, you should write a book. And I had given that same line. I don't know what the story would be. And then after we get through this time, I'm explaining to her that I think that what happened to me is something that happens for a lot of women, that I'm not the only one. And she said, well, that's what you should write your book about. And
Oh
it
my gosh.
really was like a moment of, okay, now I have a story. And it was so close and so intense. And then so later, as I wrote it, it was nice to think of a reader in mind and think, okay, maybe someone can get something from this, and that all of this, the struggle that I went through and the suffering that was in it, that it wasn't wasted. And I truly believe that about all of it, whether you write about it or not. I think you can, use the alchemy of our lives to try and transform what we go through. But this was a wonderful process for that. That's how it became a book.
Amazing. So that was 2018 when you had that revelation.
Yeah.
And
2019, sorry. 2018 was the time I went through. I saw her a year later in 19. Yes. So I started writing in 19.
So you started writing right then and there.
I did. I sat down. I wrote most of it that summer. Well, and this is kind of the winding path that hopefully, for any aspiring writers out there, I just had no idea that that was going to be how it was, right? I think so much for an achiever like me, I want to start something, do it perfectly, and have it be totally successful, like right away. That's reasonable, right? I mean,
Obviously,
no problem there.
Of course.
So I wrote 30,000 words, which is not long enough for a book by any stretch of the imagination, but I was so cute and doe-eyed that I thought that was plenty. And then I started working with a coach, Brooke Warner. She actually is in charge of She Writes Press, which is the hybrid that I would eventually begin working with. And she said, well, you don't have a book here, but I think you do have a story. And I think this is source material. So then she was the one to help me understand the structure and kind of the container, because you can have the story, but so much of a book is fitting it into a structure and a form that makes sense for a reader. That's the difference, I think, between talking to your friend and then having a product that you can sell.
Absolutely. Yes.
Julie, did you proactively look for someone to help you with the writing? Like how did Brooke come
How
into
did
your
she
life?
come into it? Yeah, it really was. I'm trying to think. Oh, okay. So I wrote in 19, and I was actually, it was probably in the winter. So, I mean, it's crazy to think about the timing with COVID because of how that all happened. So I wrote from probably June-ish 19 to December or so. So I get to the end of this story and I think, oh, look, I did it. Way to go, self. And then I went to a class at Book Passage, which is a bookstore that's across the water in Marin. And the class was called The Path to Publishing. And I went to the class and he was talking about these dismal statistics, right? About how 95% of books sell less than 1,000 copies. And he was still very encouraging, but he was like, look, if you don't have either a platform or some sort of, heavy byline sort of resume here, you're not going to have a shot with an agent or a big five. And, there are always exceptions, but he was giving good advice in that this is not where you're going to start. So you can go ahead and take that dream and, burn it in the fireplace. So just set that aside for now, sweetie. You're really cute, but it's not going to work. He mentioned Brooke, and having had met her, he said, I met her and she's super sharp. And he was basically saying, she has this hybrid model. And so really that was, okay, I remember driving home from that class and thinking, okay, so this is where at so many points along this journey, you have to decide, okay, am I going to keep going? And so reaching out to Brooke ended up being the next step. So I think I had my first call with her in February of 2020. I mean, it was right before things kind of shut down. So then she and I were able to Zoom that summer. So no, I didn't work with a coach proactively. Now I would say it's such a good idea for people, right? Like I wish I had known, I think, how much help you need to get something to a polished stage for preparation. I just think it's hard for writers, especially someone at the beginning, to even know what you don't know.
Yeah. Yeah. And I'm so glad you're talking about this, because you're doing a great service to people who think they have to do it all themselves, and that they think they're projecting this fantasy that everybody else is somehow manifesting this thing, in their own mind and then getting this incredible success. And so we really want to demystify that process. So I'm so glad you're talking to that.
I'm so glad that you're sharing that and that there's a platform for it, because it is so easy to get stuck in your head and in the process. And for those of us too, that I know for me, it came from a good place too, right? Like I love books and I love authors and reading. And so you start to think, oh, this is what I have to produce in order to be part of this world. And it's just, it's not accurate. That's a finished product that you're looking at. And so I think breaking that down into its steps, it starts like everything. I mean, it's little by little.
I'd love to hear more about She Writes Press. And so was the idea originally to work with them as a hybrid publisher on your book?
It was actually.
It was.
So I finished the manuscript with Brooke. I wrote a full proposal. She encouraged me to do that. And that was such a good exercise. Anyone who's thinking about nonfiction, writing your proposal will really help you leaps and bounds. And so that was so valuable. So she encouraged me to do that. But I remember at the time being, reading these things, which is like, oh, it's typically 80 pages. And I thought, what? I don't want to do that. This is garbage.
And right? Like, I just want to write the book.
Hello.
You already had written the book, right?
Exactly. Right. Yes. Wait, why am I going backwards? I don't want to. But it's so valuable to be able to talk about what you're trying to do. And it helps you move from the stage of, oh, look at my precious thing that I've created, to this is something that has to be positioned and marketed and sold. And so Brooke I have so many wonderful things to say about her all the time, because she is such an advocate for authors and an advocate for people who are doing what I was doing, which is just sort of muddling their way through the process. So I shopped it to a few houses that accepted unagented manuscripts, because her advice was that it was going to be tricky to find an agent. And she was right about that. So I had sent it to a few houses, no bites. And then at that time it was sort of, would this be a fit for She Writes? Because Brooke had worked with me with part of her consulting. And I remember her saying, you're the kind of author that I started this press for, who has a book that's not going to get picked up necessarily. So I had actually signed with them. I had worked through some of the process. I had a cover. The original title of this book was Little by Little. And so I was at this point in the process where I was just starting to see what the publicity outlook would be for things. And I had started working with a publicist, Caitlin Summy, who's wonderful. And there were so many good people. And I think this has actually been such an important part, because I was with a hybrid. I was prepared to do all of the work. So I think that's the other thing too, is that there's sort of this idea that, oh, I'm going to write this book and then the publisher's going to pick it up and they're going to do everything from there on out. And you just have no eye on what this is actually going to entail. So that at that point, that was when I joined Zibby's book club. I had never heard of her before, but it really was like a, sort of a trail of breadcrumbs. And I thought, oh, I'll check this out, and joined her book club, got to know Zibby. And then it was sort of this moment where she was starting Zibby Books right when I was just about to take the next step with She Writes. And so there was an opportunity for me to change and to take a traditional or more traditional deal with Zibby Books. And that's how I ended up there. So that was in fall of 21.
Wow.
And so, and just for our listeners who maybe aren't as familiar with a hybrid model, right? I think it would be so helpful for us to talk a little bit about the difference between hybrid and traditional publishing. So Julie, from your experience, to take us through that.
Yes, I am by no means a professional. I will say one person that has a lot of good information on it is Jane Friedman. So for people who are looking for that, I would say looking there, she has a lot of good comparisons. She Writes Press, and Jane has said this, really is kind of the standard for a lot of hybrid presses, because you have to be really careful. So the idea with a hybrid is that the author is going to shoulder more of the financial burden at the outset in exchange for higher royalties on the back end. So it's kind of the mid between self-publishing and traditional, which is obviously hence the term hybrid. But can I just make that? You can call me Captain Obvious if you'd like on that one. Wow, hybrid, Julie. Thanks for that.
Our readers will be very grateful. I mean,
yes,
seriously.
Yes. Let me break this all down for you. I'll make a little graphic. But basically,
we're demystifying.
Yes. So self-publishing, there are just so many pitfalls. There are so many things you wouldn't know and that can really exclude you from any further possibilities, right? You've published this book, you think it's great, and I'm sure it is, but cover design, interior page, all of these details that really do need a professional.
Yes.
And so when you're working with a hybrid, they are helping you with all of that infrastructure, but you are fronting more of the cost to print the books. You own the copies. And so a lot of it is a little bit more, you're shouldering more of the risk. And that was something that I had hit a point where I thought, okay, well, I didn't come this far to come this far. And so the hybrid model worked out. And there's a lot of privilege there, but also Brooke has a book called Greenlight Your Book, which is all about how there is a sense of, if this is something I want to do, then I can put my own resources behind this. And, there are lots of ways that people can do that, but it's definitely an extra step. But what it does is it gives you more investment in it. I think there's a little less expectation. So that's a hybrid. In a traditional deal, you're paid in advance and that can be, low to exorbitant. And so you are paid the advance against your future royalties. The publisher is shouldering more of that risk, but for a first-time author, your advance is going to be low. And then the goal is to earn that out, at least in my mind, right? Yeah. So I'm trying to, but again, because the publisher's shouldering it, the royalties are lower. So to earn out is a challenge. So everything has, and hybrid model definitely has, if you want to retain creative control, if you have a very, solid vision, if you're sure that this is how you want to tell the story, then there are a lot of advantages. And there are people that have started traditional and end up publishing hybrid because they do want that control over their own work. Yeah. Because once you're with a traditional publisher, it does have more of a group project feel at points, which can be really good. And I know that it ended up being wonderful for my book, but that can be a weird transition for people, right?
Yeah. Yeah. I think each book has its own path. I feel like for some books, traditional is the way to go. And even within traditional, it's big five and then all the independents, right?
Yes.
Then hybrid is definitely more of a partnership model where you're both the publisher and the author, you're both investing, you're partnering, you're both investing in it. The author gets higher royalties. The hybrid publisher does usually partner with someone on distribution like Simon & Schuster or Ingram. So, what's also nice about hybrid is that you are getting your book into physical bookstores, right? Versus self-publishing where it's more of an online place. So there's so many different considerations and nuances and trade-offs and I mean, it's incredible. But so it's so interesting that you're now at this point where it's like, okay, so I'm with She Writes. Okay. Now I'm in Zibby's book club, right? And so how did that happen with Zibby? Like, did she reach out to you and say, Julie, let's talk about your book? Or did you reach out to her?
So for that part of it, so I had joined Zibby's book club. And then at the time she had what is now Zibby Mag was Moms Don't Have Time To, which was her essay columns.
Yeah.
And that was on Medium. So I submitted a couple of pieces to them, which were sort of excerpts from the book, but not quite. So I adapted them and made them into essays. So one was called Sourdough and Sewing Lessons, which actually didn't end up. It was in the book and now it's not, which is hilarious to me. There are so many things that I was like, I will never give up on this chapter. And then lo and behold, you do. Goodbye, chapter. Go live your life somewhere else. But the second one was called The Gulf Between Us. And it's the scene in the book or the portion of the book where I had just come home from my first therapy session and Mondo and I were going to bed, and just this idea of the difference between distance and space in a marriage and in a relationship. And that piece did very well for them. It was one that had gotten a lot of traction that wasn't written by Zibby. So I think they felt like my writing might be a fit for them. So when Zibby decided to start the publishing house, she sent me a message and she said, I really want to work with who I want to work with. And I have enjoyed, she and I had developed a friendship, and she said, do you have a manuscript you can show me? So I sent it to her. She read through it, and that was when they made an offer. So I was able to, and I obviously spoke to Brooke and we kind of talked through that. So I was really lucky that there wasn't any need to make a really difficult choice in terms of, do you burn this bridge? Or because I think I don't want to leave destruction in my wake. And I really value the connection and the relationships that I've built. So it really was kind of a lightning strike moment, because it was right before it would have been really hard to extricate myself from She Writes. And so that felt like a real gift in that moment. So yeah, so then she and Lee Newman at the time were going through everything and read through, and I was one of their early acquisitions. So that was really exciting.
Amazing.
Congratulations.
Yeah, so will you be
Thank
their 13th book, I think? Do I have that right?
I think you're
remember.
right, Fran, and that makes my day, because 13 is my lucky number.
It's my lucky number too.
I love it.
I'm Italian. 13 is lucky in Italy.
I turned 13 on Friday the 13th. I am a big fan. So of course I'm the 13th book. That's so great. Yes, I would be their 13th.
Cool. You said that you were lucky, and I just wanted to pause on that for a minute, because it sounds to me like you did absolutely everything right. You wrote from your heart. You listened to good advice. You kept going. You created content. You plugged in with people who enjoyed you and who you enjoyed.
Yeah.
And you checked every box as you went along. So I just wanted to call a little, what on the lucky thing, because it sounds like you were very strategic in the best sense.
I appreciate that. I will say that I think there is a side of myself that I've discovered over the last year or so that has been realizing exactly what you're saying, that I was preparing. There was a preparedness that I had built in, right?
Yeah.
And I think I always leave a little bit of room for the sort of, what am I trying to say? Like the serendipity of it. And I think that's the sense, but you're exactly right. There is an element of, and this is true with all book publishing, because no one really knows what sells books and no one really knows what hits for certain things. Yep. So there's an element of, you do everything that you can to be positioned, to be smart, to be available. And for me, it really is about connection. So I think, having built some of those early ones was fruitful, but you're exactly right. I was in the right place at the right time, but I was prepared to be there. And so I think that is something to, I don't know, be encouraging too, right? You never really know what you're working toward in some ways.
Yeah.
And you were proactive about sending in the essays.
Exactly. That's what
I was. Yes. You know what's so funny about that, Fran, is that when this was in the last 6 months, I was talking to my therapist about how someone called me. They said, "You are so ambitious." And I thought, no, I'm not. And it was so funny because I had always linked ambition with sort of this, I'm going to step on everyone's head to get to the top sort of thing. I had a very narrow definition. I also once told my therapist I didn't think of myself as a worrier, which is hilarious. But I think I am ambitious. And I never would have said that about myself. And that has been a gift of this process to look back. It was one of the huge things that I realized is, actually, you know what? I do have a lot of grit and I will get after it. And I don't think I really saw or appreciated that about myself. And that's been a wonderful thing, especially as a woman in my 40s, right? Where it's like, there's still sides of myself to be discovered. And that's a huge gift.
Absolutely. And ambition is not a dirty word.
No, but I definitely had embraced it as such.
Yeah. Wow. Excellent. How would you define ambition for yourself today?
I think it is that I have the desire to set a goal and the drive and the grit to do what it takes to get there.
Got it. Yeah.
So I think that was a huge change, right? And the idea that I can do that and still retain my humanity in it. I think that was the thing, is that ambition doesn't require sacrifice if I'm doing it right. It requires sacrifice in terms of like sleep and my personal time and things like that. Sure. But I think this idea that I don't have to compromise who I want to be in the world to achieve the goals I want to achieve. And that's a huge thing to unlock.
Yeah. That's incredible.
I love that so much. Your book is coming out in 6 weeks, 7 weeks.
Yes.
So, oh my gosh, tell us about, where are you spending your time and your energy right now when it comes to promoting the book and really like getting the word out about the book?
So that's a great question. So this is where I'm really lucky, because not only with Zibby Books, with a traditional deal, it is not always assured that you will receive publicity, that they will have a publicist that's supporting you. And publicists also, you have some that are amazing and some that, work differently. And it just, the whole thing is very hard to discern, and it's not a transparent process. So you're very much, sometimes you don't know what you're going to get until you're actually in it, which is why for a lot of people, even with a traditional deal, they will hire an outside publicist for themselves so that they can have a little more visibility to that and control. So I'm very fortunate that Zibby Books, I am working with their publicity team, and then also a freelance publicist through them. And they are amazing. So they're providing a lot of pitching support for me. So for me, mostly, funny enough, I am actually working on a novel, which is super fun. And I wouldn't say I'm spending most of my time. It's probably good this is coming out later. So Zibby Books is like, what are you doing? We need you to be doing more. What do you mean you're working on your next project?
Hey, I'm over here working on my novel.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh my gosh, that's incredible.
I'm just chilling, having a martini and working on that. No, but I think what it is. So to answer your question, where am I spending my time? Social media, definitely. Yeah. And most of that for me is, I just love connecting and lifting up other authors' work too, because there's so many good books that are coming out right now. So I want people to know about that. And I have a newsletter. I spend a lot of time working on that. And I always share, what I'm watching, what I'm reading, things to be recommended, because I just think there's so much good content that I love getting good recommendations. So I spend a lot of time on those too. I'm definitely working on pitching and writing essays off the book pieces where, I have a couple of things that I'm working on there. And then also just looking ahead to try and see, especially with social media, if I can get things done ahead of time. So that's kind of what I'm working on, is how do I have things as automated as possible for January? So that's where I'm spending my time. When I'm not doing that though, I am working on the novel. And here's why. I think that publicity and pubbing a book could be the death of me if I'm not careful, because it is such an exposed process. Nothing ever feels like enough. You just become addicted to this dopamine in the best way, right? But it's tricky. Like, oh, there's a great review or someone mentioned it on social. Isn't that nice? And that is a spike. And then suddenly you're waiting for the next thing, like a junkie. I mean, it's just, it can be very tricky. And so writing is grounding me into, hey, I want to do this again. And so sort of it's giving me a forward mindset so that I don't get lost in this process, because of course I'm so happy to hear about the book, but in my mind as its author, it's done. So there's sort of a weird, I don't know. I think it's just more of an in-between moment than I would have imagined. Yeah. So that's what I'm doing with my time.
It also sounds like you're so supported by the Zibby team, which is
very
amazing. I mean, that's just so wonderful that, look, honestly, even just getting you booked on the podcast today, they were amazing.
Yeah.
The
I'm
whole
s
team.
Go
They
Zibby
really
books.
did the heavy
Yeah.
they did the heavy lifting for you,
they
you know?
1,000,000% did.
So
Yeah.
it's
That's so
just
great.
so wonderful that you have that. And the
Yes.
one thing I remember reading, correct me if I'm wrong, about
Mhm.
Zibby books is that the way Zibby approaches it is she really wants all of the authors to amplify each other's works. And I
Yes.
definitely sense that even from looking at your Instagram. Like I love the way that you were promoting the other Zibby books authors and their
Yes.
work. So how wonderful is that you're all helping each other, you're all supporting each other.
It's so easy to do because they're all great books. So
Mhm.
that's a really nice thing. But I agree, it is a gift. It's something that actually She Writes has, there's such a sense of support and sisterhood. And I experienced that from them in the short time I was there. I was in a group with some of my kind of cohort, and they were
Mhm.
so helpful. So I think two things. You're exactly right. Zibby Books is doing the heavy lifting. And because of where I started, I have full appreciation for that because I had visibility
Right.
to what it would be like on my own. And even with Ask a Librarian, which was the podcast I got to do through Zibby's network, I was reaching out to guests and did a lot of that legwork. And it is no joke. The communication and
Yeah.
coordination
Right.
and even recording intros, the time is more than I would have thought. And that's
Yeah.
also my other thing about being ambitious. I'm also the person that's ambitious, but I don't ask a lot of questions first. So my husband says my life motto is shoot, aim, ready. And so it's very true where I'm like,
Yeah.
oh, look, here I am in this, and it's a lot more work. So they have that visibility. But yes, we do kind of have, when I left She Writes, I was thinking, oh, am I going to still have that? I'm going to miss that. And I've been
Mm.
very, very lucky
Mm.
to find it in Zibby Books. And I think her once a month model really lends to it too, because
I love that.
you have
Yeah.
time to celebrate someone else's success
Yeah.
and then you kind of
Oh
get
my
your turn.
goodness.
So
Well,
it's a
that is
huge gift.
it's such a great point, right? They have one book coming out each month. So the
Yeah.
team is focused on that book. I
It's,
mean, it's like, yeah,
yeah,
It's great.
it's an
I'm glad.
insane privilege. It really is to have that sort of attention and that sort of investment. And they're all just, they've become friends, so many of
Mm,
them. And it's just, they
mm,
love the books. They love the
yeah.
Yeah.
books. And to
Yeah.
watch that happen is, I mean, I'm so
What,
grateful.
I'm just so curious. So the book is coming out January 9th now.
Yes.
What do you envision yourself doing on that day? Like, what does that day look like for you?
Well, so I'm actually going to be in LA. So I will have a launch at Zibby's Bookshop because I wanted to
Oh.
be home on the weekend for when I have it here. I think in some ways it's probably going to be good to be away on that day. So basically, my plan is I guess I'll travel down there. But, I sort of think of it like a birthday where, when it's your birthday, you get a million texts and a
Yes.
million, like all this wonderful attention and love. And it's both really great and sort of overwhelming. And it feels,
Mhm,
birthdays always make me a little bit melancholy because I have that bittersweet feel, right? Like I'm getting
mhm,
older, but time is passing. And
mhm,
it's always a really good, happy day, but it's also a strange day because it's
mhm,
so out of the
mhm,
ordinary. And I have a feeling I'll have a lot of similar feelings on that day where it's
mm,
kind of the overwhelm of that
mhm.
attention and wanting to connect. So I don't know. So I'll travel down to Zibby's Bookshop. I'm not sure if my husband will be able to come with me. I might just be alone that night. I'll find someone to hang out with.
Oh, that would actually, yeah, that might not be
That
the
sounds
worst
pretty
thing.
great.
yeah, right. But it
Get a
is,
good-
I will be doing a tour and I am realizing even I will see my parents on part of it. And they said, well, we'll come and we'll pick you up. And I said, no, I need to, build in plenty of time alone here because it's going
Yeah.
to be a lot.
Mm,
I think,
Yeah.
yes,
I think it's going to be an
yes.
emotionally costly time or just a
Yeah.
high, social cost. So being smart about that. So yeah, so I'll probably be head down in my phone most of the day, and then I'll look up at Zibby's Bookshop. But I mean,
Mm,
I'm I'm really excited. It feels like
mm.
it's the day I've waited for, and I can't wait. So I'm excited.
Amazing, amazing. Well, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us today. I've been really reflecting as you're talking on how wonderfully you are sharing the intersection of the books, the art of the book and the business of the book. And I love how you're keeping yourself grounded in the dopamine addiction of the business in the art. And you forget this. And I'm so grateful that you are talking to that.
Thanks for distilling it that way. That actually is exactly right. You're so right, because so much of the publicity part is not real. It's wonderful, but it's not a real world thing. And I don't mean that to diminish it. It's wonderful, but there is a side of it that's just not quite real. So to stay grounded in what's real, which is, I hope to, share words that are meaningful to people, then that's the goal. I love that idea. I will be borrowing that. I will absolutely credit you.
That was a good one, Bethany.
Way to go.
That was a good one.
What advice, as we wrap up, what advice would you give to first-time authors who would like to emulate your path?
That is such a good question. I think the advice would be set out and know what will define success for you, and accept that can change too. I think that is, have some flexibility in your goal setting. So, you set, and remembering that this is a marathon, not a sprint. So this idea of the goal that you set, once you hit that, then you're moving on to the next one, but that goal might diverge a little bit from the path that you originally thought you were looking at. So I think having some adaptability, because I tend not to do that. And that's something that I've gotten better at through this process. So, and I think just also enjoying, try and write something that you love writing. Don't think too much about you know what I mean? So when your near goal is, you want to write a book, but your near goal is, okay, I want to write a manuscript and I want to maybe have some joy in the process. That can be goal one. And then, you kind of, I think you leave room for a little bit of serendipity, but then also know what's under your control. So that's very convoluted advice, but
not convoluted.
That's the kind I give.
Not convoluted at all. Very clear and very helpful. And I think our listeners are going to get a lot out of that.
Oh, good. I'm glad.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
So just before we wrap, Julie, please let us know, what's the best way to follow your work and to stay connected with you?
I love that question. So I have a website, which is juliewriteswords.com. I'm on social at Julie Writes Words, mostly posting about what I'm reading, what I'm doing, and the way that my children are bothering me, because they live for that, because they're teenage boys. So there's that. And then also, I mentioned it earlier, but I do write a newsletter, and that's the best way to stay caught up with me and what I'm doing, just because sometimes updating the website or getting on social can be a lot, but the newsletter is just, and it's just a fun thing to write and be connected with, my people. So those are the best places.
And we can sign up on your website.
You can sign up on my website.
Okay,
yes.
Great.
And I will not send you anything except the MLM opportunity that I will be creating post haste. I'm kidding. I won't. I would never do that to you.
That's amazing. We so loved having you. Thank you. Thank you so much for spending this time with us. Yay.
This was a joy. Thank you.
Good luck with your launch.
Good luck with the launch. Oh my gosh, we're so excited.
Thank you for joining us on Bookbound.
If you like what you heard, please subscribe and rate and review us on your favorite podcast listening platform.
Please visit us at bookboundpodcast.com for more on us and how we work with authors.